I'm Don Coscarelli, and you're listening to the Cinematography Podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography Podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey, Ilya, how's it going?
Hey, Ben. It's another week. It's another episode of the Cinematography Podcast. Hey, Ben Rock, tell people who you are.
I'm Ben Rock. I'm a raconteur. I'm a director, and lately I've been doing a lot of writing. You can find my stuff at benrockonline.com. You can see some of the work that I've done. I did a podcast called Video Palace somewhat recently, which spawned a book spinoff, which is the book we just gave away, the Video Palace in Search of the Eyeless Man. Done some films, done some second unit, done a bunch of stuff. Also, I co-host a cinematography podcast. Don't know if you've heard of it, but I think it's pretty good. I think it's got legs. How about yourself, Ilya? Tell people about you.
Oh, me. Man's man, ladies man, man about town. I don't remember which movie I stole that from, but it's something. Anyway, when I'm not hosting this podcast, I run a camera shop in Burbank, California called Hot Rod Cameras, which we specialize in selling equipment to the motion picture and television industry. If you need gear, we're also the sponsor of this podcast, so please find us there.
Hey, I have a random update. While I am talking to you, I am goofing around with I'm not currently while I'm talking to you, but I'm actually looking at a render progress of my short end from last week, Swarms, which it took me a minute because it was a project from like 2015. So I had to kind of go back into 2015 head and reconnect a million assets. And I have a different computer than I had back then and, whatever. But I finally got everything going, brought Swarms into After Effects. And I have to say, I think Swarms is an amazing product if, like I did, you need to add bugs to stuff. It's pretty sweet.
I can't wait to see how you use it.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a bit of work, but I'm trying to maybe hopefully have this episode rebuilt by Halloween so that I can have a cheesy excuse to force people to watch 20 Seconds to Live. Watch my stuff, everybody. Anyway.
Hey, Ben, pick a number between 1 and 7.
I'm going to go with 4.
Okay, 4. 4, this random number that you just chose means that JF Leshop, I think is how it's pronounced. Forgive me if it's wrong, Mr. Leshop, but you're the winner of the new book from...
the Video Palace book.
Yeah, that's right. The book giveaway. You are the 4th comment here on our video. Ben picked 4. So voila. Please get in touch with us. Please send us an email. I don't seem to be able to find an email from you on your About page on YouTube, but you're the winner of the book. So please send a message to email@camnoir, and we'll make sure to get that to you.
Hey, and speaking about book giveaways, if
Yes.
I'm not mistaken, we have yet another book to give away.
We do, as a matter of fact.
It relates directly to tonight's guest, Don Coscarelli.
It does. It is a copy of his book that came out not too long ago. And if I'm not mistaken, the title of that book is True Indie, Life and Death in Filmmaking.
And he talks about it a bit in our upcoming interview, which if you're listening to this episode, you really came here to hear that.
So what we're going to do for this giveaway is we're going to have a video up on YouTube on the Cinematography Podcast YouTube channel. And all you have to do is subscribe to the show and then comment, and we'll probably do something similar to this one, but hopefully we'll have maybe a few more entries. Maybe it'll be 100 entries, and I'll say, Ben, pick a number between 1 and 100, and then you'll pick a number, and then we'll give away a book.
If you like horror movies, if you like indie filmmaking, if you like Don Coscarelli, and hopefully you like all 3 of those things, definitely enter this. The book is awesome. Don is awesome, and I can't wait for people to hear this interview just because he's an amazing talent. He's been making films since he was 19 when he made his first feature. I thought the only person who ever did that was Sam Raimi, but apparently Don Coscarelli also made a feature when he was 19. Werner Herzog probably made one when he was 6, but...
Yes, quite possibly. It seems like that guy got started maybe in utero. So
he actually has made 2 feature films since I started this sentence.
All right, Ben, what are we talking about this week on our Close Focus segment?
On our George Foyt Close Focus segment.
That's the one.
Yes. So our Close Focus this week, we wanted to talk about the untimely death of Quibi, which I feel like Quibi was something that people were predicting the death of 2 years ago when people were just talking about it getting going. Now, I should say, in full disclosure, I actually pitched a project to Quibi before they launched, and I subscribed to Quibi and I checked out some of their content. It was pretty good. And it was top notch, top flight. Their whole idea was Quibi is short for quick bites. And so as someone who has made, as I never stop talking about on this podcast, a web series called 20 Seconds to Live, something I'm very proud of. Those were all very short episodes. I think our longest one, our Lawrence of Arabia episode, if you will, was about 3.5 minutes long. Our shortest was like 1:30. Quibi's episodes were in the 6 to 8 minute range, and they had created an interesting technology that I thought was promising for people watching stuff on smartphones. It's all designed to be watched on smartphones. So on smartphones, you got your portrait and your landscape mode, basically. And, most YouTube videos are intended to be watched in landscape mode, so that's holding it horizontally. Things like Snapchat, who make a lot of their own original content, were encouraging people, or not encouraging, but all their content is available in portrait mode, vertical. So what Quibi was doing was, I believe they were shooting everything in like 8K or some ridiculously high resolution, so that when you were watching your material on there, if you were watching it in landscape mode and you turned your phone vertically, it would reorient your show and you could watch it either way. That was part of the idea. That was part of the technology. Now, it was created by Jeffrey Katzenberg, who, when he ran Disney, famously said, if you don't come into work on Saturday, don't bother coming into work on Sunday. That's an actual quote.
It was also co-founded by Meg Whitman, former CEO of Hewlett-Packard.
And someone who tried to run for the governor of California.
That's true. And it raised a fair bit of money in venture
in the billions. It raised billions.
It was widely heralded. There was a lot of people talking about it. They hired top flight talent to make their shorts, and still all the greatest talent in shorts in the world couldn't keep Quibi from closing. And I am not happy about this. I'm sad to see them go. Not because
I think it's terrible. It's a lot of content, a lot of talented people made it. A lot of people put their heart and souls into it. People went in and pitched them just like any other network, pitched them ideas for shows. They got stars to be in their stuff. It wasn't like 6 goofwads in their iPhone making stuff. It was for real.
Oh, and to be clear though, I'm not sad for the billionaires whose baby this was that failed. I'm sad for the creators and the fact that there's one less place out there to sell your products, to sell your shows, one less marketplace essentially for people out there, especially someone who wanted to really capitalize on sort of a web series format, which would be short episodes and serialized content, and also was available to watch like on your streaming TV and services and stuff like that. For a while there, when Emmy Awards, we got the screening links to Quibi, so we could go look at this Quibi stuff on a TV screen, and the production value was totally there, but clearly the subscriber base, the people shelling out money every month, didn't show up. And my thinking is that Quibi was going to do a deal with like a cell phone carrier. They're going to do something like with like a Verizon. You sign up for Verizon and you get 3 months of Quibi, and I don't remember ever seeing them do something like that. But just immediately then Quibi could have had access to like 100 million subscribers or something like that. And then they could have, in theory, sold that company because they had all these subscribers. It would have had all this extra value. But no, it didn't go down that way. And, the pandemic's certainly been blamed. But it's.
But I feel like, I mean, look, I haven't looked at their financials or viewing habits or whatever, but I feel like how do you realistically blame the pandemic when now you have the most captive audience on earth and everyone has this phone in their pocket? I can tell you how it's like that, because that is a new startup thing that people don't really know, and there's a ton of people captive with all these other viewing options at their disposal, where if people were living their life and really on the go, the whole idea behind Quibi was it's going to be an on the go thing, like, oh, I've got 10 minutes here, I've got 5 minutes here, I'm going to watch these things. That didn't happen. People had lots of time. They were sitting on their couch. They had lots of time sitting in a park with a mask on. I think a lot of people have experimented with this kind of format, and I'm not saying it's not viable. I mean, if I thought it wasn't viable, I wouldn't have bothered with 20 Seconds to Live. And I've gone to numerous web fests with 20 Seconds to Live, and those are basically just film festivals entirely for web series. So the ones that get into those are often the ones that have the better production value, or, whatever. They're really well made. It's curated. And so I've seen some pretty amazing stuff at the WebFest level. And Quibi was, a step beyond that. So, WebFests are people like you and me, or maybe people with access to some outside financing trying to build an audience. And I think that there's maybe it's a fool's errand, maybe it's a noble fool's errand of people saying like, hey, we like making movies and TV shows that look like movies and TV shows. We like that aesthetic.
As opposed to looking like YouTube.
As opposed to a video of somebody, unboxing a bunch of Disney toys and filming themselves and getting, making, millions of dollars doing that, or people filming themselves playing video games, or any of the things that really get the most traction on a YouTube or a Snapchat kind of a place. And, in the middle of all this too, by the way, TikTok, I know TikTok was around before Quibi launched, but TikTok is having no problem gathering eyeballs. And I feel like it's gathering eyeballs where just a few years ago, Vine failed. And TikTok is sort of just doing what Vine did. I mean, it's doing it a little different. It's next generation of that kind of an idea, but it's not an insanely different idea. Yeah. So to me, it's like Quibi maybe is one of those things where, like, as a lover of old media that I am, I want to see stuff like Quibi work, because Quibi is old media trying to find purchase in a new media environment, but the new media people aren't really biting on it.
You're a lover of old media. Does that mean you're a fan of the penny arcade?
Yeah.
You like looking into a little tube and turning a crank and
I like the cinematograph.
The cinematograph.
Big fan of the cinematograph. Yeah. But
I saw an Edward Muybridge in one of those cinematographs there. So
it was very exciting. I was like, man, that horse really is going to gallop like a motherfucker. So anyway, but yeah, I think it's a bummer that Quibi is dying. I'm hoping that content finds another home. I mean, just a few years ago, remember, YouTube was trying to do something like this with YouTube Red.
And that didn't work. They closed that down.
They closed that shit down. I actually interviewed to direct a movie that was being made for YouTube Red. Didn't get the gig. I was a really weird choice for it, so I'm not grousing about that. But I remember paying a lot more attention to YouTube Red after that. But if you recall, Cobra Kai, the Karate Kid spinoff series, premiered on YouTube Red. Now it has migrated over to Netflix
and getting new seasons. Yeah, getting orders for more episodes.
Yeah. So it's possible that if the people who made the shows for Quibi have enough material there. The problem is that if you take it to Netflix isn't going to want to make 6-minute episodes. And my guess is if you take all your episodes and stitch them together, it's not going to feel like a longer episode. It's going to feel like 6 episodes stitched together. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe a re-edit and a re-sound mix and, really try and make it, you could make the 6-8 minute chunks feel like acts of a longer episode. I don't know.
Well, Variety is actually reporting that the creators who put together the full-length versions of the projects that got chopped up and shown on Quibi will actually be getting the rights back after 2 years. And they can then try to sell it globally. The short format isn't going to be available to them for like 7 years or something like that. But after 2 years, they get the option to try to see if someone else will pick it up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, also, let's not declare Quibi completely dead yet. They may yet figure a way to reorganize and re-come out some other way and whatever. But I do feel like trying to create episodes of TV shows that feel like primetime television, which is what they're doing, maybe is barking up the wrong tree when you're trying to go after the youth market, which is primarily who's going to watch something on their phone.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Hey, well, let's get to the interview with Don Coscarelli.
Here we go.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
So I'm dying to talk to you on the Beastmaster. I've seen the Beastmaster a million times because, again, my dad took me to see it in the theater. And I,
oh, wow. Hey, he had good taste.
So that movie was what, like 1981 or something?
82. Yeah.
So I would have been 11 years old. Anyway, so he took me to see it in the theater. It scared the crap out of me, especially those creatures that like wrap their arms around you and dissolve your whole body. Love that stuff. And then, of course, I saw it a zillion times on cable. But I wasn't aware, I had never looked into it until we were talking about trying to find it, that it was shot by John Alcott, who, shot some pretty huge stuff. Like he shot a lot of Kubrick movies. He shot A Clockwork Orange. He also shot a movie that no one has ever heard of, and is a comedy, but terrified me as a little kid, probably more than any horror movie, called Who is Killing the Great Chefs of Europe. I don't know why it scared me as much as it did, but as a little kid I saw it on cable, and there's like a shot of a guy's arm falling out of an oven, and there was just, it's a sight gag, but it creeped the shit out of me. But anyway, can you talk about working with somebody like him? Obviously, we don't. John Alcott passed away in 1986, I believe.
Yeah, a terrible loss. Yeah, listen, he was a great man, and obviously won the Academy Award for maybe the most amazingly shot movie of all time, which is Barry Lyndon. And
yes.
if you revisit the movie, because that was back, I guess he always did it, but I'll say back in the day when Kubrick would actually have, an army of English and French soldiers, and they would wait for the clouds to come in to get the right lighting and then shoot the battle scenes. So, and it was also the film that John, working with Cinema Products, I think they developed this 0.7, I don't know if it was an f-stop or a t-stop lens, so that they could shoot all these grand sequences in candlelight.
It was like a NASA satellite lens or something crazy, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was right. It was from some sort of NASA thing that they adapted, and then the movie, it holds up and looks fantastic today. But here was the thing. So I made Phantasm, and like an idiot, I thought I got to do something big after it. Instead of just being smart and doing another genre picture, I thought, well, I want to go back and do something like those great Hercules and Hercules Unchained starring Steve Reeves. I love those movies. They called them the sword and sandal movies. And so with my partner, Paul, we co-wrote the script based on a sci-fi novel, and it became The Beastmaster. So I was 26 years old, and I had shot I had filmed all of my movies, actually. My first 3 features, I was the cinematographer, co-cinematographer on that.
Oh, wow.
When you're a DP operator, it's a lot of freaking physical work. I mean, especially in the old days of film, where you're pushing these cameras around and you're doing the dolly moves and you've got to do this. And then tying in director and trying to direct and all that, a very difficult job. And so this movie was going to be big, although let me qualify that by saying it was still Beastmaster was a low budget indie film. Yeah. And at the time we were too embarrassed to talk about the budget. And so there are these numbers saying that we'd spent $9 million and it was an epic, okay? We spent about $4.5 to $5 million on that movie back in 1982, which was not a lot of money if you go back and look at it in terms of the horses and the animals and the stunts and all of that stuff. So there was no question that I needed to hire a cinematographer, and a producer friend mentioned that he was working with John Alcott up in Canada on a horror film called Terror Train. And like the alarm bells went off in my head. I'm thinking, well, if he's working in Canada on that, maybe we could get him. And so we made an outreach. And the timing was just perfect because Alcott wanted to relocate to Los Angeles and bring his entire family and live in Southern California and become a Hollywood DP, basically, which was great. And so, we met with him. Just a super nice, gentle man, very intelligent, very soft-spoken, but steel spine, iron-willed. In any case, the sad part about it is that, the process of making, to get the larger numbers of millions, sometimes you really have to sell your soul. And I really did on The Beastmaster, because the financial partners I got involved with, there was so much creative interference on the making of the movie. And it ended up, it was a low budget movie, but we maximized everything to get shooting days, because that's, to aspiring filmmakers out there, that's the key. I mean, the more days of shooting that you can have, the better the movie you make, period, the end. That's all there is to it. And we managed to organize the budget, so we got 72 shooting days. But unfortunately, it was 12 6-day weeks. So man. It was, anyway, that takes me around to the point is that I rarely, and I kick myself now, I rarely got to talk with Alcott about his experiences working with Stanley. I mean, basically he would talk about, I would ask him, I would frequently hear other crew members go, John, why are you out here on this movie, working with him? And he would basically say he just got tired of waiting around for Stanley, because there was so much downtime and so much waiting always between projects, and even during projects. They build hiatuses in and what have you. And I think he wanted a little more high-octane career, a little more action, and it was a smart move. But the one last thing I could say about John Alcott was what a great stand-up guy, because I think it was day 3 of the Beastmaster, the powers that be started thinking about firing me, because they had this idea in their head that I could not direct action. And I had to defend myself and go, hey, I had action in Phantasm. I put together those sequences, and they didn't listen to me. But anyway, Alcott found out that they were interviewing other directors, actually. And the guy had moved his family out to Southern California and, leased a house and changed his whole life. And he just let it be known that if Don went, he would go. And they didn't fire me. And, thank you, John.
Oh, that's amazing. That's great to hear.
We were approached by a company called Vinegar Syndrome that wanted to do a restoration of the Beastmaster, which was really exciting because they were, wanted to do a complete restoration from the best material possible. So my producer and co-writer Paul Pepperman and I decided to try to track down the best element we had, because I had done a restoration of Phantasm a few years ago.
I've seen it. It looks amazing.
Yes, under the auspices of J.J. Abrams was kind enough to let us use his system over there, Bad Robot. It was great. It was like unlimited color correction time, which is for a filmmaker, unlimited color correction time in like a full-on suite, right? But the whole challenge was I would have to go over there off hours. And there was this great guy named Juan Cabrera who was the colorist. And so I'd get this phone call like, Juan's available from 7 till midnight. Come over tonight, and I could get 4 hours with them. And this went on for several months, and we did a fabulous job, or he did, with Phantasm. And I saw what the possibility is, especially going back to the original camera negative. So with Beastmaster and Vinegar Syndrome, we wanted to find that original camera negative. And the short story of it, and you can read all about it in whereisthebeastmaster.com. And I'm afraid we've pretty much given up that the Beastmaster original camera negative is gone. But it was moved out of a decent quality vault by an affiliate of the rights holder and put into his garage in the valley. And if anybody knows about film preservation, putting a 35 millimeter negative in the valley in the summer, it's horrible because, I think the specs are at the best vault that I keep stuff at. It's 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 25% humidity. Yeah. And that it can get over 100 degrees in a garage in the valley. I'm thinking that
it was 118 degrees in the valley like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So anyway, bottom line is we figured it was probably destroyed there. But then the affiliate, he moved and forgot where the negative was. And supposedly maybe it was left in the garage. And Paul and I went actually over there to try to knock on the door. And in the interim, the new owner had put this like 8-foot tall fence around, and there was no doorbell. And we were like jumping and yelling. We never could talk to the people.
Oh my God.
But so we got really frustrated and started this website called whereisthebeastmaster.com, and check it out. There's a lot of connections to film archives and background stuff on film preservation there. But through this process, it turned out that at Warner Brothers in the vaults there, they had a perfect interpositive, which was struck off the original camera negative back in the day and then put in the vault and never used. And so that's the item that they're using. And man, it looks gorgeous. The quality of film restoration, when you can go back to original materials now, it reminds me, I'm jumping around, but when we shot Phantasm, we had this almost an obsession, or I did anyway, that we had to get the best quality camera possible. And we made this sweetheart deal with Panavision, who gave us one of their state-of-the-art Panaflex cameras at the time for really cheap. And we had the Panavision lenses and even a modified Arri 2C that we could use their lenses in. Then when I saw that many decades later in color correction, I went, I knew what I was doing in getting that good camera, good lenses, and then preserving the negative, because it's a great way to capture media, 35 millimeter film, when it's properly taken care of.
So for our listeners who came up during the digital era, could you explain what an inner positive is?
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, there was a printing process to make release prints back in the day. And so you'd shoot your film on a 35 millimeter camera negative, which would then be edited, and the negative would be cut. And then the first element struck off of it would be an interpositive. Because for some reason, don't ask me why, because I don't know all the photochemical science, but you would have your original negative, then they would need to make a positive, so then they could make a internegative to then make release prints, because you were going to run the internegative through the printer a lot, and that would get damaged. And so this way, you could use the interpositive to create multiple internegatives. But the bottom line was, it meant that even in theaters, which we all look as theater is the best exhibition, you were looking at something that was 1, 2, at least 3 generations down from the original camera negative. Yeah. So that was the interesting part of that.
But an interpositive would differ from, say, a release print in that is it not color timed?
No, it's definitely color timed. No, you would do so here's the process that you bring it back. It was crazy times back then. The control was so limited. I mean, it's so fantastic to go into a color suite today, with a Da Vinci system or a Mystica system or one of these processes. You have so much control over your film. But back then, it was just sitting in a room, and you would have a guy called a color timer, and he would strike what was called I guess it was an answer print. So he would look at the negative on this machine called a densitometer. And on every shot, they would change the color settings in the optical printer. So it was, as the film went through it, so the 35 negative would go through the printer, and they'd make this answer print. You'd go sit in a room with the color timer or color grader, as they called it in the UK, and you'd go, oh, that shot's too yellow. Oh, that shot's too green. Oh, that's too dark. Like that.
Yeah.
He'd be taking notes, and it missed a lot of stuff. And they usually give you 2 or 3 passes like that. So you'd have this your timing lights set in, and then they would make an IP interpositive, which was pretty much a timed version that became sort of your master, that then they could make the internegatives. And frequently back when they made film to tape, they would use the interpositive as your main material. So it was an arcane system. It was really interesting for me, which is when I came up and started making movies in the mid to late 70s, and through the mid to late 90s, I was making movies the same way Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin were making movies. I mean, we had color, but it wasn't that much different. We had this film running through a camera, and it had to be exposed correctly, and you had all these weird printing processes. But then, in the 2000s, my God, it just turned so quickly. And, here we are today. It's not that long ago. It's maybe 12, 14 years ago. And I meet so many people that never shot anything on film now.
Well, it's funny because post all went digital, in the 90s and the aughts.
Yes.
And then it was literally just cameras catching up with post.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I kind of want to back up a little bit and just kind of talk about your career in general, if you have a few minutes, because I don't think I've seen every single one of your movies, but I've seen the ones that are available to be seen, and I've seen most of them multiple times, including Bubba Ho-tep and John Dies at the End, Phantasm 2 I saw in the theater. I was too young to see the first Phantasm in theater.
Cool.
So I have a general unified field theory of the story you tell. And
okay.
All right. So I've pitched this.
Ben, I want to hear it, because so often people ask me questions about my career, and I have my career. I don't know. I made a few movies, and they are what they are. That's the only insight I have to them.
Okay, so this is my opinion, again, having kind of studied your stuff. And by the way, we've talked to two of your DPs, and I've run this by both of them. So that was Chris Coman and Mike Giolakis.
Oh, yeah, they're both great.
And so the theory is that there is another world. It's terrifying and dangerous, but also ridiculous at the same time. And I feel like that kind of like encapsulates, I mean, like, because a lot of what you do kind of walks the line between horror and comedy, which is very hard to do. I mean, I feel like the first Phantasm is more of a straight up horror movie, and Beastmaster is like that sword and sandal kind of a thing. But especially as your career has progressed, stuff like Bubba Ho-tep, John Dies at the End, and John Dies at the End I have seen dozens of times. Saw it in the theater twice.
Oh man, that's so wonderful.
No, I'm a giant fan. Can you talk about it might just be me describing your creative sensibility, or I don't know if any artist, if there's an intentionality that goes that deep, like I'm going to tell a story like this, but what is it about those stories that attracts you?
Well, you really made me spark something, which is that possibly the number one redeeming quality of this life that we lead as these sentient Homo sapiens is this capacity for humor. What it made me really immediately spark to, because in the most horrifying times in your life, there are moments of levity. Obviously, you got to embrace them, because what it made me flash back to is I had this, not to get too personal, but I had this in the 80s, this freaky health problem that required exploratory surgery. And I was over at Cedars-Sinai and waiting for the gurney to come take me down to the operating room. And I look out the window, and I can see down into behind the hospital there, and I see this hearse pulling up. And I just burst into laughter because I thought, well, number one, I thought, oh, that's, I could be going in that thing if things went wrong. But then the other thought, having been around death with the making of Phantasm, it almost thought, oh, well, the tall man's here and he's going to take care of me, So, but the point being is that humor is so important, and I just can't help but finding things that are funny and absurd in life. And when you want to get to talking about John Dies at the End, when I read David Wong's book, it was just like, it was right up my alley, and I just loved it.
Well, let's talk about John Dies at the End, because I think it's an underappreciated movie, because I think everybody should see it. It's a horror movie, but it is hilariously funny, and it has some great moments of tension and terror, and a ton of laugh out loud moments. And when we get to the other world, when we see what the other world is, it is, like I said, simultaneously terrifying and kind of ridiculous, and intentionally so. Absurd maybe is a better word to describe it, but it is ridiculous. It's funny. And I think horror comedy is a really tough genre to get right. Horror comedy, you go too horrific, it becomes morbid and you can't laugh at it. You go too funny and it takes all the stakes out of it and you can't be scared by it. And I don't know if there's a secret that you have, but like in a movie like John Dies at the End, how did you go about kind of balancing both of those?
Well, first off, it was all there in the book. And, it was just a function of trying to make the action moments real and visceral, and at the same time, getting those deadpan lines to play. 100% you got to give to Chase Williamson, Rob Mays, Paul Giamatti, Clancy Brown, Doug Jones, Ty Bennett, Glenn Turman. These guys all were able to, some played it perfectly straight. Although, the scene with Glenn Turman, the cop, where he corners Dave at the Rastafarian's trailer. We're getting really into the weeds here. And he's going to murder Dave. He's a cop. He's going to murder the character of Dave in cold blood. He's got his gun out on him. And he's got this can of gasoline, and he makes this reference where he goes, you may be wondering why I'm holding this here can of gasoline. And we played it pretty straight, and wow, in the audience, they just went, the laughter was insane. But anyway, it all comes from David Wong, brilliant writer, who, by the way, for anybody who likes the movie, he's got 2 sequel books in the stores and a third and maybe a fourth in the pipeline. So there's lots of John.
I knew about this book is full of spiders. I didn't know that there was another one after that.
Yeah, it's called What the Hell Did I Just Read? and it may be even better. It's great stuff. He's really talented. But anyway, bringing John Dies at the end back around to why we're here talking about cinematography. So look, hey, I worked with Alcott and some of the others that you mentioned, but maybe my favorite cinematographer, and I'm not going to say and I love Mike Giolakis, but the guy who got Mike Giolakis the job, his name was Roberto Quezada. Mm-hmm. And Roberto worked on Phantasm as a camera assistant and immediately got a battlefield promotion to gaffer. And he was so focused on lighting and really helped me to get the visual style of Phantasm. But, I guess working in the industry just wasn't, he photographed a couple other movies, but then left, and he was in the internet for a while and other things like that. But he always had his finger in it. Whenever he was working on, something that involved commercials or whatever, he'd meet young filmmakers and gaffers, and I told him, well, I'm making John Dies at the end. And he said, oh, you got to talk to this guy, Mike Giolakis. I was on a commercial shoot and I talked to him. He's a gaffer. He's a really sharp guy. And so I met with Mike, and what a wonderful guy. And let me just explain to you in a nutshell why, not just creatively, but to make that movie what it was. Because, we had a very tiny budget on John Dies at the end, but again, super big ambitions to try to make all of the stuff that came out of the book real. And Mike, being a gaffer, got us a great deal at Cinelease for a truck loaded with grip and lighting. And 2 days before shooting, he went himself and picked up the truck. He drove it to our warehouse down in the city of Paramount, down near Southgate, and he completely unloaded the truck and pre-lit the entire set by himself on like a Saturday and Sunday, so that Monday we were ready to go. So this is the kind of dedication you need to make, an indie film like that. So I was always in his debt for that kind of dedication. And who would have known the artistic qualities, although, this was before LED lights, and man, he used our power consumption at that warehouse was insane. I mean, we were running, I don't know, 50K or a lot of lights to light some of the small things, but it gave real natural, beautiful stuff. Really talented guy. And so exciting for all the great movies he's done since.
Oh my God, yeah. It Follows and Us.
It Follows is a great movie. Yeah.
I love It Follows so much. Yeah, no, yeah. It was exciting to get him on the show. But I have to say, maybe this is too obvious already, but when he came on, like the number one thing was like, oh my God, I got to talk about John Dies at the end. Now he told me, and also Chase Williamson told me, that you guys had kind of an unusual schedule on that, where you would, shoot for 2 weeks and then take some time off or something. Like I don't remember exactly what it was, but there were gaps in the shoot. What was the reason for that?
Well, it's really simple, because I don't care about, well, maybe, I haven't had the luxury of working on a $100 million budget. In fact, my biggest film to date, money-wise, was The Beastmaster. But my sense is that anytime you're making a movie, you get on the set and maybe you haven't quite figured things out, and a lot of the stuff that you really need isn't there. Mm-hmm. And to make that happen and fix, you need to take the time and figure it out, and you need to get the shit that you need to make the scene work. Again, that just comes back to time. And now I learned, and on accident, see, when we were shooting Phantasm, I really wanted to try to just shoot the film in a straight schedule. And we made a valiant effort and got about 8 days in and just completely crashed and burned production-wise, and had to shut down for 2 weeks, and then started shooting on weekends. And so you'd finish Sunday night, you'd have Monday to return the gear and rest, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you'd be scouting and planning and getting all your shit in order to make the sequences that you wanted to make. And then you just work like hell for 2 days and start the thing over. And that worked beautifully on Phantasm. Like I said, Beastmaster didn't have that opportunity. But, a few movies later, coming back to John Dies, I had this idea, which was, couldn't we possibly make it on an intermittent basis? And so we hired, the beauty of making that was that you had to get your key actors like Chase Williamson and Rob Mays, and we basically hired them, I think, for 17 weeks on the lowest of low SAG budgets. Yeah. So they had an income, and they were happy because they were struggling actors.
Chase was like 1 year out of college at the time, right? Didn't he just graduate from college?
Chase had shot nothing except like a YouTube project video. And then it worked out. We got Paul Giamatti, who was just a wonderful ad for the project. And Chase had to shoot his first 2 days with Giamatti, and each day was like 6 pages of dialogue.
Wow.
It was really shocking. But, the other thing you got to say about Paul is that he's a really cool guy. And he came over to my house and worked with Chase for a few days beforehand. And they had those it was that Chinese restaurant scene.
Yeah.
And they had that all figured out. But some of the most fun times I had on that movie was after we had finished our principal. And by the way, the way we did the intermittent was we'd never shoot more than 4 days. And some days we'd shoot 3 days a week, which would either give us 3 or 4 days off, which was just a great way. And, we ended up shooting over about a 10-week period, but it was maybe about 32 days total. But we had the time to get ready for everything. But the other thing, which I always try to build into my budgets, is to pick up, because it just feels like you need to work with the movie and look at it and see where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then have the ability to go back and improve those with additional shots, additional angles, or, scenes that you just couldn't do during principal and you had to just throw off to the end. And those scenes that go onto the production board, like something like, one day we're going to figure out how to shoot that scene. And one of those was the meat monster sequence. We had this
that is such a great
monster
sequence.
made of meats. And, while we did have a few digital effects, which are really beautiful, that our team, I use that loosely, we had a couple of independent effects guys who really helped out beautifully, where they animated some like pieces of trout and frankfurters moving up along the guy's back. But the bulk of that meat, for the audience who hasn't seen the movie, basically John and Dave get trapped in a basement where the doorknob is locked. I won't go into how they lock the door, but anyway,
definitely see the movie to see how they make a doorknob that cannot be opened.
Yeah, my favorite line of the movie, that door cannot be opened. Anyway, there's a chest freezer that starts to rumble, and it opens up, and these pieces of freezer meat come flying out. Then they start zipping around the floor and assembling themselves and stand up and become a fully articulated monster. So we had the pieces of meat. There were all these little pieces of rubber meat. And then we had this gorgeous freaking costume designed by Bob Kurtzman of the final meat monster. But this transitional sequence of making the meat come together basically required me, the producer, Brad Baru, Mike Giolakis, and one other person, I can't remember who it was, one of our loyal crew members, like 4 of us, on the floor of that basement, puppeting pieces of meat with fishing line. And so we're like, and using, experimenting with different frame rates, pulling them across. And then we had a really cool little skateboard dolly that we could put the camera on and follow pieces of meat. And so you'd have like 3 guys pulling pieces of meat in sequence, and great fun. Best part of making that movie, for sure.
And it's a perfect example, I think, of what I'm talking about, where that meat monster, when fully realized, is this terrifying wad of extremely threatening meat, but it's got sausages for fingers, and it's got a chicken for a head and stuff like that. And it's kind of hard to look at it and not think it's funny, but also if I were in the room with that, I'd be terrified.
Absolutely. In fact, that costume was so detailed that the other hand that's sort of in the shadow, and I kicked myself for not getting more light onto it, the whole arm was a complete pineapple baked ham with slices of pineapple on it. It was amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about some of your other work. I wish that you had a Don Coscarelli movie for every year of existence, but the previous film you made before that was Bubba Ho-tep, which also I saw in the theater, and actually I recently rewatched it, I think on Amazon Prime. And again, a terrifying movie, but also hilariously funny. So funny, and casting Bruce Campbell in the lead obviously kind of guarantees humor. But also you worked with Ossie Davis, who's just one of the greats, like just such an amazing character actor.
Oh, well, Ossie's he's a legend. I mean, he was not only just an actor, he was a director in his own right, and a writer, historian, and social activist. So the guy had quite a life. And in fact, I just recently was watching his March on Washington, where he was the MC of the 1963 March on Washington. He was also gave the eulogy at Malcolm X's funeral. So
I didn't know that. Oh my God.
very rich career. So you can only imagine what it was like for him to be cast opposite Bruce Campbell. And I'm not exactly sure he knew who Bruce was, to tell you the truth. But both of them had this working class ethic, and they developed a rapport off screen that, kind of neither one of them, both of them were kind of no bullshit types of guys, and they related based on that, getting the job done, and I think you kind of see a camaraderie between them and the characters. But last thing on Ossie, we had a scene, Ben, it was just like out of that great Ed Wood movie, which is one of my favorites, where you had Martin Landau fighting that rubber octopus and bringing it to life. And only as a great actor can to breathe life into a rubber prop. Well, I had the same experience with Ossie Davis fighting this rubber mummy down on the grass, like his life depended on it. And at first you're like going, this is ridiculous. But then he's like screaming and, fighting the thing with all his, with everything he's got. It was amazing to behold.
And I think that, that movie visually for you, I don't know, I can't really describe it, but there was a shift in the visual approach to it. And maybe it was just because it was driven by the material itself, because, again, it's Elvis and a man who believes he's JFK fighting a mummy in an old age home. So the mummy is terrifying and it's killing other residents and it's a scary mummy, but the very premise of it is hilariously funny. And it kind of walks that line, but there's sort of a matter of factness to your photography of it. It was like reading a great novel. It just kind of let me sit there and soak it in a lot.
Well, no question, because we're trying to make those performances, and a lot of the dialogue came from the original short story by Joe Lansdale. As a real, if you haven't read any of his work, he's great. Really trying to tell the story as best as possible. I think, one of the biggest challenges, of course, was we needed to establish that Elvis had hit bottom, because as the story tells it, he had gotten tired of the merry-go-round of being Elvis Presley, and he wanted to get off that. And he made a deal with one of the best Elvis impersonators, and they met up at this carnival in the Southwest, and they switched places. And by the way, it harkens back to all the great stories from back to The Prince and the Pauper. I love switching places stories. And so thinking that, the real Elvis then made a life for himself traveling the Southwest, working as an Elvis impersonator. I mean, how cool that is. And living in a trailer park and drinking beer and having barbecues with the trailer park residents, living the life that Elvis was denied because of his fame. It's a really sad story. I look back on Elvis's, he had, if you read between the lines, there was some heroism there in Elvis. The way he was, even despite how popular he was, so respectful. He had those Southern manners, So that's the setup. And then, as the story goes, he gyrates a little too much, throws his hip out, and falls off stage at some festival. And, 20 years later, we find him in an old folks' home, just discarded. And so we had to make that old folks home look really bad. Now, I don't know if you've been to senior care center lately. I think they're getting better, depending on the amount of money you have to spend to be in them. But I remember when I was a kid visiting my grandmother, and the place was kind of terrifying to me. And to be warehoused like that, I think that's, we just discard our elderly, who we should cherish. And there was that subtext in the movie. But we needed to find and make it look like he was really in the worst possible place, which was this Mud Creek Shady Rest home. So, I was working with the production designer, Danny Vecchione, who's now a DP in his own right, and his art director, Justin Zaharczuk, and Adam Gennaro, the cinematographer, to make this place look really grim. And, we went with the darkest texture on the walls, almost to the point where I thought, oh, this is way too much. And then just keeping it really grimly lit. And then maybe, once Elvis started to get his mojo back, to then start to, brighten it up a little bit. So that was the challenge, certainly, visually.
Did you shoot that under the same kind of schedule that you were describing for John Dies at the End, where, 4 days on, 4 days off, whatever? Unfortunately
not. I think the best trick I could do on that one was to start midweek, which, again, aspiring filmmakers out there always start on a Wednesday, because then you only work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You get 2 days off, And then you can, in your first week, you only shoot those 3 days. The bottom line is if you do that, you get more weekends spread apart throughout your schedule. And so that was the only trick there. Although we did do a lot of pickup shooting. And an interesting thing is we've got Bruce Campbell's stuntman, John Casino was his name. Like we did that whole sequence on the wheelchair fight with the mummy. Like we had shot one shot with Bruce, but then watching it, we really need to have those guys duke it out. I had none of those shots. And surprisingly, this great benefit of having Elvis, if you take a stuntman who looks sort of like Bruce Campbell and you put on the wig, the glasses, and the mutton chops and the old age makeup, for stunt action, it worked pretty well.
Oh, cool.
And so we were able to get some shots there. So that was good.
Could you, I feel like this is like a real inspiration for filmmakers, talking about taking time off between your shooting days, which is something that we're never allowed to do. Never, ever, ever allowed to do. The first movies I ever worked on were shot, out of town. I was working in the Southeast in like Alabama, and those were all 6-day-a-week shoots. Like if you were not in the city where the production was based, it was always 6-day a week. But 5-day a week is pretty de rigueur, and I know that it's not a normal way to do it. It's not conventional, but it sounds like a brilliant thing. Can you tell me what are you doing on the down days? Because I assume you're
who me? Well, first off, you got to take a day to regroup and rest a little bit.
Yeah.
So usually that's, you wake up, and if you've got dailies available to look at, or you've got your drives and you can watch what you've shot. So you kind of do that laying on the couch. And then the next day, it's really heavy into making sure the script's right and any kind of visual effects. And then it's also possible, a lot of times you can't, the actors don't want to do anything, but at least you can get them on the phone and start talking about what you're going to do over the weekend and how that's going to happen. And, it just gives every other department a chance to catch up. Problem is, of course, is it just doesn't work in the union structures, unless you could build down days. And that just, I don't think that it makes any sense there. So in a way, it only works if you're doing an indie movie with friends and where you've got crew, who are trying to make a name for themselves, and they, if they're only employed 3 or 4 days a week, they're okay. They can survive on that. So that's the challenge. I think it's not practical otherwise, unfortunately.
Well, it sounds like it would have the potential to eat up budget if you're not careful.
Absolutely true. Although, look, if I had the resources of some of my other director pals, I would do a modest budget on that. You could still. I mean, if you had $5 to $10 million to make a movie, let me say $7 to $10 million, I think you could do it on that, on a simple movie. If it's mostly people talking and not too much in the visual effects, you'd probably build in some off days, I bet. I've done that. Actually, on Phantasm 2, we had a little more rigid crew, and we shot over Christmas, and I think we just built in the contract, everybody, actors included, everybody wanted to take 3 weeks off for Christmas. So we shot for 2 weeks and then stopped for 3 weeks and then started up. That was another good way to do it.
Yeah, I worked on a project that did that once too. I was second unit, and we shot right up to the week before Christmas, and then we came back at the end of January, and it was interesting, But
oh yeah, sure, wow,
yeah,
that sounds great.
I think it had more to do with somebody had to spend their budget by the end of the fourth quarter or had to say that they'd started shooting in the previous year. Because when I started, I was like, man, you have to budget in a wrap and a prep, an extra wrap and an extra prep in this entire shoot.
Yeah.
That just sounds like a nightmare to me. But so I definitely also want to talk about Phantasm. I think the first interview I ever read with you was in probably Fangoria magazine when I was a teenager, and it was about Phantasm 2. And it was about the scene with the spheres that pierced through people's heads, and how you had edited it exactly the way that you had edited one of them in the first Phantasm, and you got an X rating and had to go cut it down. They weren't allowing you, the MPAA wouldn't let you keep it the way it was. But obviously there's a huge budget jump and a huge even just experience jump in you between making those movies. Can you talk about sort of the evolution of yourself kind of through those movies at all?
Well, it was during that period between Phantasm 2, I'm trying to think, well, I shot the Beastmaster, and that was a nightmare. And then I made a movie called Survival Quest and worked with another, I've had the joy to work with some great directors of photography because I got to work with Darren Okada. Bottom line is, I made this wilderness film called Survival Quest. And my friend Roberto was going to start filming that, but he was also a producer on that, decided he couldn't shoot it. So he brought Darren in to shoot it, and it worked beautifully. He did a beautiful job. And then Darren, who had been the grip on Phantasm 1, shot Phantasm 2. And so it was a much more organized fashion where we had, much more professional crew, 10 times the budget of the original Phantasm. Still, it was under $3 million at the total, but it was a lot of money to spend. And we got professional visual effects and big lighting, and we could, we lit up that. We had this scene that I'd always wanted to do, which was what a graveyard would look like after the tall man had ransacked it. And we built this graveyard, and in one day, a guy with a backhoe just dug like 200 empty graves. And
wow.
Then got this, it was a beautiful crane shot that Darren designed where we followed our heroes walking through, and then you pulled up over them. This was all at night and lit, and it was beautiful. The kind of things I could never, accomplish on the first movie. So it was quite exciting.
And I mean, like, you've kind of kept a good continuity on those Phantasm movies throughout. Like, if someone were to sit down and watch all of them in a row, like, there was one cast switch, but for the most part, it's the same two guys in the cast, if I'm not mistaken, and in the leads. And then obviously, is it Agnes or Angus?
Angus. Yeah, Angus Scrim. Yeah, the entire cast was pretty consistent, except for that Phantasm 2. James LeGros took over for one movie.
Yeah.
But and I think that's what made it wonderful for me, and probably different from the other horror series, because they tend to have a whole new cast, and then sometimes bring in a new villain. But in any case, that consistency was great. Which again, it is weird how Phantasm went full circle, because we made Phantasm 1 on a shoestring, which is basically friends and students, just working for a year to make something interesting on 1, and then we had a full budget on Phantasm 2 and could do something professional. That pretty much held over into Phantasm 3. We still had a pretty sizable budget, but then parts 4 and 5, it was like going back to the roots and shooting them guerrilla style. Phantasm 4 with Chris Coman, another terrific DP. And Chris, we were able to do that on a very tight budget. And then Phantasm 5, which was maybe the most fun of all of them. I didn't end up directing it, but it was shot over
Ravager?
Ravager. It was shot over like an 8-year period.
Whoa.
Where it started as tests, where this very talented, his day job's an animating director and supervisor named David Hartman. And Dave has this ethic, which is another thing, when you talk to aspiring filmmakers out there, is like, make movies. Like, Dave goes out and makes a movie every weekend. If he gets a new piece of software or a new lens, he makes a little short every weekend, and he's always flexing his muscles. And he came to me and he said, Don, let's go out and shoot a Phantasm movie this weekend. And I'd made 4 of them, and I'm sitting around, and I'm like going, well, that might be fun. Let's do it, And I called up Reggie Bannister, the actor, said, hey, would you want to get involved in this really little, like a weekend thing? And he says, yeah, hey, come up. I'm up in the mountains. Come up. We shoot it at my cabin. And so we went and we shot, and it was so much fun. I think it was like 6 people. And then the bulk of that movie, we started, I think, in 2000, what year was it, like 11. It was shot with a Sony EX3 camcorder, basically. And what it taught me, people can criticize the photography on the movie, but really taught me that, man, you can really be camera neutral in terms of, it's so much about, number one, location. If you got the right location at the right time of day, you can shoot with anything. I was going to say with an iPhone, but iPhones are great nowadays.
I know. Well, and there have been at least 2 movies that have been theatrically released that I know of that were shot on the iPhone, Tangerine and Unsane.
Yeah. Great movies, both of them. Yeah. But in any case, so we shot that movie, total student film style, where we'd shoot for a weekend, and then Dave go, how about we do a scene where Reggie meets this girl? And we go, okay, do you have, I have an actress. Great. Let's do next weekend. Let's go do it. And so we did this for a period of time. And then I had to stop and went to do John Dies at the End for a couple of years. And then I was thinking, what do we do? Because I always thought maybe we'd do a web series, but I don't know. And then a few years later, we got together and finished it. And again, over about, 8 more weekends to finish that. And the movie has some flaws because of the budget, but man, it's got some epic stuff that Dave was able to pull to it. And it was just so much darn fun because, what was I doing? I was gaffing. I was doing the boom. I was doing the blood effects with Reggie's wife, Gigi Bannister. I got my hands in everything. And I think that's one of the things I resist most about the way that professional movies are made, is how the job categories are so stratified, and you can't have any, it loses the sense of fun that, that whole ethos of, hey, let's go out and make a movie this weekend. Is so. Yeah,
on a union show, I once got yelled at by the line producer for moving a C-stand because I was second unit director. So
God forbid you should try to help.
Yeah. I mean, they're like, if we needed more people to move C-stands, we'd hire more people. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, sir.
The last thing that I really want to talk to you about is your book, True Indie: Life and Death in Filmmaking, so you wrote the book 3 years ago. Like what led you to decide to write a book about what you do?
I just started writing chapters about the worst experiences in my filmmaking career.
All war stories.
And it was so cathartic, honestly, to get it down on paper. But then later, once it started to come together. I could just sit down and I came up with a format that was pretty easy and readable, because I just read a biography by Chris Jericho, the WWE wrestler, and it was great because he would just tell the stories in like one page, and they just have a chapter about like one story and build up to the stage. So I really found a theme and kept the chapters pretty short and used that. And so I wrote the book. And it was really well received, thank God. And I think the interesting part about it, they never really pushed it as much as they should. I thought it would be a really good, textbook for aspiring filmmakers, because I certainly am very blunt about all the mistakes that I made in the process. And believe me, I made a lot of them, and so they're all in there. It was kind of weird. I'm still planning and plotting other films, and hopefully some of those are going to come into fruition in a very short time. But kind of felt kind of early in my career to do it, but I did it, and it was fun and interesting.
No, that's great. No, well, and thank you so much for coming on here. Before we go, is there any place people can find you online?
You can find me at Don Coscarelli on Twitter, the same on Instagram, and I have a Facebook page just under my name, Don Coscarelli. So you gotta learn how to spell Coscarelli, which could be a challenge. But if you master that, you can find me on all of the sources. But hey, Ben, this has been a fantastic time, and I just want to tell you that cinematography is why I got into making movies. And so much of making movies is not cinematography. It's writing, it's salesmanship, it's promotion and marketing, and getting the ability to make your movies. And yet the thing that I love is lenses and film and camera since I was a kid. And so I love what you're doing, and I'll continue to listen. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. So that was Don Coscarelli. Thanks again so much for coming on, Don. If my fanboyness wasn't on full enough display, I can't say enough good things about his work. I'm a giant fan of John Dies at the End, and Ilya, you can attest that when we had Mike Giolakis in, all I wanted to talk about was John Dies at the End, and you had to be like, no, you have to talk about It Follows, and you had to like beat me with a bag full of oranges to get me to do. You've still got
the lower back bruises from that too.
No, I mean that's the beauty when you beat someone with a bag full of oranges, is it doesn't leave any marks,
or it kills them. It's one or the other, as David Mamet has proven.
And also, I kind of want to do just a minor shout out to Video Palace, the podcast that I mentioned earlier. Actually stars Chase Williamson, who was discovered by Don Coscarelli and who was the star of John Dies at the End, and he literally landed that role like right after he graduated from acting school. I think he went to USC. And like right out of college, he got that role, and it was like, congratulations, you're hired. Here, go do a bunch of scenes with Paul Giamatti.
You know what? I have to take 2 steps back, though. I just realized it wasn't David Mamet who proved a bag full of oranges could cause temporary, painful-looking bruises that didn't cause any real damage. That was actually from The Grifters, and that was written by Donald E. Westlake, and it was based on a 1963 novel of the same name. And, of course, it starred John Cusack and Angelica Houston, and directed by Stephen Frears. Because, Martin Scorsese, just a little movie called The Grifters, but that was it, the bag full of oranges.
And I'm just gonna let it go that I just kind of rolled with it, thinking like maybe you'd seen a David Mamet thing that I hadn't seen, even though I'm kind of a David Mamet fan.
In my brain, I transposed The Grifters and House of Games, and that's how that went down. So
interesting. House of Games, great movie.
And now, short ends.
Let's rein it back in. Ben, you want to talk about your short end this week? I have no idea what you're going to talk about.
I know we haven't. We usually we discuss these things, and I haven't discussed it. I wanted to come up with something that was a little bit of the Halloween season, and I think I've got a good one. Arrow Video. They're a Blu-ray and DVD distributor of kind of interesting, sometimes surprisingly mainstream, but also like way out cult films. They have started a streaming service just called Arrow. And I think it's pretty damn awesome. I subscribed to it a couple weeks ago. They've got, they have like I'm just kind of scrolling through it right here. Like the top thing they have is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And then a horror movie I keep hearing great things about, and I have not seen it yet. It was made by a family, like a father, daughter, and wife, I believe was the team, called The Deeper You Dig. I've been hearing nothing but raves about it. People keep saying it's awesome. And then they have like something called Microwave Massacre and Driller Killer, Bloody Birthday.
This is so up your alley. I can tell.
And then like they have, okay, so check this out. They have a whole subcategory of Edgar Wright selects. So Edgar Wright, the director of obviously Shaun of the Dead, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, Hot Fuzz, like an amazing director. And so
Baby Driver.
Some of these movies I haven't heard of. Like one is called What Have You Done to Solange? Never heard of it. But I would watch it just based on that recommendation. Audition, have seen it. Reanimator, not only have I seen it, but Stuart Gordon was my short end 1 week. Blood and Black Lace, the original Hellraiser, John Landis's debut feature Schlock, Cat of Nine Tails, which I believe is Dario Argento. So there's really amazing stuff on here, and it's very curated. And it's something that I've often said that I loved about Shudder. Full disclosure, I worked for them on Video Palace, but I'm not being paid to say anything nice about Shudder, but I think Shudder is a great service. And what I love about Shudder is that it's heavily curated, meaning that you're not going to like everything on Shudder, but you're going to realize everything that's there is there because somebody at Shudder loved it. And Arrow is exactly like that, but it's got a different angle. They have a different point of view, but it's kind of similar cult and Halloween kind of stuff. So definitely if you're looking for a cool Halloween thing to do, right in line with Don Coscarelli, although I don't know if they have any Don Coscarelli movies. Didn't see his name on there. Wouldn't be surprised if they had Phantasm or any of his stuff on there, but definitely check it out. And also, if you have Shudder, I do believe John Dies at the End is on Shudder, and I know the Phantasm 4K restoration is on Amazon Prime, I believe. Oh, and by the way, it came up in the interview, but the whole reason that the interview with Don Coscarelli came about was because of our producer, Alana Cody, when we brought up the website that Don Coscarelli had set up to try and track down the negative for the original Beastmaster. She thought that was an interesting story and wanted to bring him on. And when we were interviewing him, and it was said in the interview, they have kind of given up on trying to find the negative, but they did find a pristine interpositive. So they're going to be making a brand new transfer, or they maybe have already made a brand new transfer right off of the interpositive.
That is wonderful news. I'm really glad to hear that for all of the Beastmaster fans that exist and the ones that are sure to come after seeing it.
So Ilya, what is your short end?
I love to try to stay away from technology, but this one I have to go back to technology because very recently, just in the last few weeks, there's a new mirrorless camera that shoots really, really incredible photos as well as really, really incredible 4K full motion video up to 30 frames a second. And it's from a company that I'm quite fond of called Panasonic, and it's the Lumix S5. The Lumix S5 is a full frame camera. I know that'll get your attention.
I'm way into full frame cameras. That's true.
but the body is super small. It's about the size of their 4/3 sensor cameras. So it weighs very little, but the sensor inside of it, and that really is the heart and the soul of any camera system out there. If you want to know what's responsible for the quality and the look, I mean, you can't just say it's only the sensor, but without the sensor, everything else fails. And they have really, really smart electronics that back up that sensor. But this sensor is the same sensor that's in their flagship $4,000 camera, and this camera is half the price. So they made a smaller body, half the price. And they actually do a kind of a clever starter kit with a 20 to 60 millimeter full frame lens. It's not particularly fast, but it will get you shooting immediately. And everything's under $2,300. It doesn't have expensive media, and it has the full dynamic range and all the fun stuff that flagship, super high end, super premium camera has. You miss out on a couple of things, like it's a different size HDMI connector, and there's a couple other very minor things they've removed. But for someone out there who's like, I don't have $4,000 to spend on a camera, I can't possibly justify that. But if you got $2,000, you can pretty much get the same visual performance, and it'll be smaller and lighter and everything else. And in a couple of ways, it actually is more advanced. It has better stabilization and some slightly better autofocus and that sort of thing. So we'll put a link in the show notes. Of course, you can get it over at Hot Rod Cameras, and we have a demo over there too. So if someone wants to come by and check it out, it is sort of like the little camera that could. There's a lot of new cameras, and a few weeks back I talked about all new cameras that are coming out. This is one of those new cameras that is further pushing that price and performance. And there's other wonderful cameras out there that are similar price, maybe a little bit less, a little bit more, but this one I think will actually tick a lot of boxes for people, just because the fact that it really is that super high-end performance and a real bargain price.
That sounds awesome. I would love to check that camera out, because I've been kind of looking to upgrade a full frame camera.
Well, this is a really good one. You should definitely at least put it in your hands and play with it a little bit. There's a couple other cameras out there that are absolutely worth looking at the same time, but not to take anything away from the not stealing the thunder of the S5 by diluting and talking about some other cameras. I'll talk about those in future short ends, but anyone who's considering a $2,000 camera from any manufacturer right now really should look at this one, because the performance is absolutely first rate, world class. Absolutely competes with everything.
Wow, cool. That's awesome to hear. Well, I think that wraps us up for this week.
I think so too. Let's where can people find you, Ben?
Please go to benrockonline.com. I recently kind of streamlined it. I made it easier. There was some stuff that Squarespace was doing that seemed cool, except it bogged down for some people, and I was like, I'm getting rid of that stuff. So go check out benrockonline.com. Tell me what you think. Also, I put my new manager's info on there, so if you want to go there and send an email to my manager, it'll make me feel productive. Yeah. How about yourself? Where can people find you?
You can find me over at Hot Rod Cameras, and also I'm going to plug LinkedIn this week. For some reason, I've had a lot of people requesting to join my network, so if you want to find me on LinkedIn, there's a lot of people reaching out to me there lately. You can find me because I think I'm one of only 3 Ilya Friedmans, but you'll know which one it's me. I'm the only one in Burbank,
Can
California.
I say something a little controversial?
Yeah.
I think LinkedIn is pretty good. I know everyone makes fun of LinkedIn. It's like the Nickelback of social media. It's easy to make fun of. But I've kind of grown to like LinkedIn and Nickelback for that matter.
Well, you have not grown to like Nickelback.
That's true.
That's not happened.
That's true.
You're making a joke.
I am making a joke, but Nickelback is just kind of the easy punchline. I bet if we went to a Nickelback concert, when you're allowed to go to concerts, we'd have a good time, and we'd be like, hey, those are pretty good musicians. And I'm not familiar with any of their music, so it doesn't matter. Regardless, I think LinkedIn isn't bad. I've been using it a lot more lately, and the manager who I just signed with, we met on LinkedIn. I got nothing against LinkedIn. Way to go, LinkedIn. When we did our Indiegogo campaign for 20 Seconds to Live, 10% of our haul came from LinkedIn, and I wasn't even really using LinkedIn at that time.
I'll give LinkedIn some props, but there is a certain level of spam people who want to connect with me just to spam me. And if you're that person, you will be unlinked really quickly.
Also, I want to say this. I broke down after years of LinkedIn trying to get me to try LinkedIn Pro, and they give you a month of it for free, but you have to give them your credit card. And I was like, okay, I feel like what they rely on is that you forget that you authorized it, and it goes on and on and on forever. So I was like, let me check out LinkedIn Pro for a month. And I set a calendar alert for the day, exactly 1 day before a month later, so I could remember to delete it. Unless I was in love with it, then I'd keep it. But it's because it's a little expensive. It's I think $30 a month. That's a little...
Well, it's professionally priced.
Yeah, neat, whatever. So I tried it for a month. Didn't care for LinkedIn Pro. I think regular old free LinkedIn is just Jim Dandy, and I don't think most people probably need the Pro.
I have never tried the Pro, but so far really enjoying regular LinkedIn and some of the cool connections that people have found me and looked me up and mentioned the podcast, and that's all wonderful. So
I think this makes us both dorks. Anyway.
All right, enough social media talk. Let's thank some people.
Well, first off, let's thank Alana Cody, who busted her ass to get Don Coscarelli to come on the show. It was honestly a dream I'd had since I was like 15 to ever be able to talk to Don Coscarelli. He did not disappoint. Super nice guy, and even went so far as to send me a DVD for one of his films that I hadn't seen after our interview was over. So thank you, Alana.
Class act.
Class act all the way, 100%.
Okay, let's thank editor Ben Katz, who's going to be putting together the YouTube version of Don Coscarelli for our YouTube channel here shortly. That's going to be the first one that you guys will have seen. It's a little bit different. It's basically allows you to listen to this podcast on YouTube. And if you do happen to glance up at the screen, there might be like a waveform moving around, or, a picture of our guest, or, Ben's mug or my mug.
It's Don Coscarelli. It should be one of the flying spheres that sucks all the blood out of your head. Come on.
There'll be other little bits in there. Ben Katz is doing a great job putting that together. I saw the like a preview that he made, but by the time this goes live, we should also have the YouTube version up there as well. So it's just another way for people to like and enjoy this show.
Excellent. And lastly, we should definitely thank Kay Zalatracci, who probably didn't listen to this show because I don't know if he's a fan of Don Coscarelli's or not, although he should be and everyone should be. But he and I have probably never talked about it, so I'm guessing it's not his speed. Maybe it is.
We'll thank him anyway, even though he's not.
Yeah, so all the music you heard on the show was by Kays, and you can find him at musicbykays.com.
All right, Ben, I think that'll just about do it for another episode of the Cinematography Podcast. Let's gracefully sign off the way we always do.
Gracefully. I'm curtsying. People can't see. Thank you.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.